to ask Professor Sola to say a bit more about economic emergencies and national security emergencies, because you certainly know the recent essay by Adrian Vermeulen and Eric Posner saying that Carl Schmitt has conquered Madison in US political practice in the last few years.
Well, apart from what Professor Vermeulen wrote, I completely agree in this thing. Carl Schmitt is a very disagreeable man, and his writings have both things. He's a fascinating Nazi, if there is such a person in the world. A very brilliant man. He was under the salary of the German presidency before the Hitler advent, and stayed with Hitler till practically the end of the war. All his books have this debate, two big debates which are, I think, the main problem, perhaps not so much in the state, but in other places in cultural, economic problems. This division between friend and enemy. You debate things between friend and enemy, which I find terrible as to define a society in that. But we in South America suffer from that, so it is much more vivid than I could imagine. And the other thing is the challenge of exception. Sovereign is he who rules exception. The whole system, political system, is based for the cases and when we are going to have a problem, a war, an economic crisis. So every time economic crisis or war appears, Carl Schmitt is taken again and reread throughout. Curious enough, by the left. I know there is a new biography published in London by Verso, which is more or less left, I would say left, it was not necessarily rightist editorial. Why? Because there is this feeling that Carl Schmitt gives the foundation for a new populist system where there could be a direct linkage between the ruler in the middle of a crisis and the people, without structures in the middle. He said in reality, there is two constitutions. One is the decision of the German people. That's why it's called decisionist. A decision of the German people, and that are the basic rules that we should follow. The rest are constitutional laws. They're just for to be applicable and not to be applied in case of emergencies. So in a way, he finishes or stops the typical constitutional process, the debate. The debate is a sort of magic moment between the ruler, the president in a case of emergency, and the people in general. Well, he wrote many other things. I'm always surprised that they come back to Schmitt. I know what I quote in this case, not only because of this thing, but because in Hayek, you feel his anger against Carl Schmitt. He doesn't quote him very much, but many of the answers, knowing Schmitt works, are an answer to Carl Schmitt. And he has a quotation in one of his books, in Law, Legislation, and Liberty, demeaning Carl Schmitt in a very strong way, which I think is valuable. And
I think you ought to be up here as moderator, if I may be rather bossy.
And then finish. I'm sorry.
No.
My concern is that we are 3 minutes past the time we were supposed to have finished. So might I suggest that we run about 7 minutes late and take questions from the audience? Sorry.
It was just that you were looking so anguished that I thought
I was going to ask to ask whether it was okay to be 7 minutes late.
I wanted to follow up with your question. Looking at your paper here, I was fascinated by a quote by Heinrich Raumann, natural law is an imperishable possession of the human mind, and your focus on evolution, and we had a discussion about this before the panel. How do we deal with the evolution of natural law? There's a core, clearly, that cannot be touched. We can add on to it. It's very Aquinian. But how do we deal with natural law fallacy, for instance, with regard to, say, same-sex behavior or households? Aristotle viewed households in one particular way, but we have single-parent families in Harlem. So how do we, through our empirical observations, bring our evidence back into the evolution of natural law? And this is a serious problem for us because some institutions like the Roman Catholic Church are ossified with regard to natural law interpretations that involve eternal law informing natural law informing canon law and human law. How do we deal with that problem with regard to natural law fallacy?
I just mentioned Heinrich Roman because it's a very strong author saying that the philosophy is perennial. And if the philosophy that informs law is perennial, law has to be unchanged. And I felt that was a point in Hayek which I think should be not considered so strictly. To answer your point, canonically, there are other experts here of natural law, but and I'm not. I'm not a follower of natural law, but there are only two solutions. The traditional solution is new information. There are some things that we didn't know. And then the things we didn't know, we can consider with the same principles, but openly. And the other one is that they are impossible. I come from a country where same-sex marriage is allowed. Allowed by law, but if not, it would have been allowed by a judicial debate, because of very strong constitutional arguments, which you may agree or not. And in that case, there is not really a solution. The solution is denial. There is no natural law. The problem I have with natural law is that it is very or impossible to apply it to people who think honestly, coming from different cultures. We are a multicultural society. We have to have an open debate about legislation. So we cannot have a jurisprudence of values, and much less this formal, but it's an open subject, of course.
Thank you.
Do you want to come and recognize people who want to? He's a rather laid back.
Spontaneous order, that's right.
They have to shout.
What I found quite fascinating between this panel and the last panel,
fascinating between this panel and the last panel were the wrestling with questions of, in this case, and that you've just described, natural law, or the deontological. That is that which is said to be a basis from which a rule that are just given. And what's the strong version of the deontological position for me is, or a quality, is that it has within it an understanding of a well-ordering for a social good. And that the consequentialist ethical position doesn't necessarily attach to that a notion of what that society will look like. It does have a vision of the individual. And I wondered if you could comment on that, or could think about each of your cases in relationship to what seems to be a tension. And I think that it's not coincidental that the Luth case and how it was decided to intervene, an assertion of inalienable or unchangeable legal principles, and a thing like the Declaration of Human Rights for the UN, where there's an assertion of a universal set of rights that we all have, which doesn't pay attention to the particularism of culture per se. came about around the same moment. Anyway, I wondered if you could comment.
Well, I think there's a profound misunderstanding of the history of economic thought, which in some ways goes back to John Stuart Mill's reading of Ricardo, which was to some extent a dialectical reading, in that he was so annoyed by the early 19th century proto-historicist economists who were also forerunners of Schmidt, in a sense, people like Adam Möller, that he was exaggerating the extent to which even Ricardo thought of the sort of spare and abstract individual. But I think, as so many people have said today, there's almost nothing of that in Adam Smith. And I think if one looks at the kinds of issues that Frank Knight, for example, was concerned about, one can connect them very clearly to something that's been talked about a lot around the edges of this conference, namely the consequences of long-term unemployment. And I want to mention here one of the great Columbia sociologists, Paul Lazarsfeld, whose classic work about the unemployed of Marienthal, a village outside Vienna, this was done in the early 1930s, mid-1930s, was a most devastating account of the ways in which individuality, and for Lazarsfeld and his co-authors, rationality, is affected by a dynamic process that takes place when you have no social interaction. And people reminisced about the times when there were tigers in the Vienna woods. They, in his mind, irrationally spent money when they couldn't buy potatoes to buy a postcard from a peddler which had a view of Venice on it. I mean, it's a very gripping account, and one that's very, very much worth pondering in the circumstances of the United States and many European countries today. And of course, it goes far beyond job satisfaction to the satisfaction of being in an occupation.
I want to mention two references, and I'll reveal my bias here. The Gulbenkian Commission on the Restructuring of the Social Sciences, published by Stanford University Press. I urge you to read it, and there is a focus on economics. And also, you've probably read E.O. Wilson's Consilience, The Unity of Knowledge. There's an interesting chapter on the social sciences with a focus on economics. You already know my prejudice, my bias, the interdisciplinarity, interdisciplinary collaboration with a focus on the individual from the micro to the macro. And I come back to this because economics has to pay attention to serious biology and serious psychology. I see each person is in a chariot with 4 horses pulling the chariot, but we don't have the reins. Each horse represents reason, emotion, instinct, and sensation, including intuition. We just don't know within ourselves how those horses are going to pull that chariot. Well, they'll pull in alignment or in opposite directions in one moment and over time. And neither do we know that about another individual or a group of individuals. As Freud said and Bertrand Russell, they could not guarantee that reason could stem the tide of emotion. And this, of course, for Freud, was in the 1930s. And we know what happened in World War II in Nazi Germany.
Just a minute for Lutz and the Declaration of Human Rights. No, the difference between you could apply the Declaration of Human Rights or the Treatise of Human Rights like any type of constitutional law or a treaty and interpret it to a case. In the Lute case, it was said that those principles, not the text of the German Constitution, the principles in the first 2 articles, had to be applied to every law all the time, the principles. So the civil code had to be interpreted according to those principles all the time. So it was extremely more rigid vision than the general jurisprudence that in the United States is very common. I'm sorry. Oh, no, but
We started 25 minutes late. I
No,
comment
no,
in
but
the interest
we
of
have to
justice
have the
between
opinion of-
sessions.
No, we have to have the opinion of Professor Nagel at least.
I just wanted to take one moment to offer a complimenti to Senor Pazzaglini, whose work this afternoon reminds me of Gustav Mahler, who said that a symphony must be like the world. It must include everything. Bravo.
Tanta gracia.
Emma Rothschild said at the end of her talk that inequality is a very important part of the contemporary economic culture, at least in this country. And I want to ask a sort of pop psychology question. Ned Phelps has been concentrating on another feature of economic culture, attitudes to enterprise and the motivation of creativity that drives economic growth. And there really does, and he points out that this is much weaker in Europe, where, although they are weakening, egalitarian sentiments are stronger than they are here. And this, in a way, also repeats a question that was posed by Amartya in his talk at lunch about whether there is some trade-off or conflict between the virtues of creativity or respect for those values and egalitarianism. And my intellectual or normative sense is, no, there shouldn't be. But there seems to be empirically some problem about combining them, and I wonder if you think there is anything to this.
I think the reasons that inequality are so central to the questions we've been talking about are first that the free market system requires that people have precisely confidence in the economic system, and that is implicit in what Hayek says about people having a responsibility to obey the rules of market games. It's also essential to people having confidence in the political system, and it's been argued that a free political system is the necessary foundation for a free economic system. But if one thinks about John Taylor's view that rules should be predictable over time, how can one anticipate that economic rules or rules about the regulation of solar power will be consistent over time when the US Congress and the US executive is as fickle and fluctuating over time as it seems to be at the moment? So I think, as both Smith and Hume in different ways suggested, inequality is one of the conditions, like the ability to accumulate money and market power and use it to buy rules and norms, that can poison the entire enterprise. I think it is related to the creativity question because one can see what's happening now as a deprivation of the possibility of creativity for many millions of people in this country and in Europe. That, I think, is the lesson, in a way, of the long-term unemployment studies that have been done. And I think here that Amartya's point about education, which is again a very Smithian one, that if every child does have a foundation early in life that will enable her or him to be resilient in the sorts of ebb and flow of market experience, then that's something that's of profound importance. I mean, Smith uses this absolutely marvelous phrase talking about education. He's completely unconsequentialist and unutilitarian in his arguments for widespread education. But he says if the poor man's children can learn to read and write, then when they're adults, they will have ideas with which to amuse themselves. You know, and that's to do with creativity, I think, as well.
I want to come back to deep biological imprints regarding inequality. If someone gives me 1 marble and Professor Sola 2 marbles, I'll be okay with that. If that same individual gives me 1 marble and Professor Sola 5 marbles, then I will engage in subaltern retributive justice without a program, which in some ways, obviates and discounts the ability to create, because one is just reacting to that inequality. And that's what we're dealing with. We're seeing this. We saw this just recently in London and in the suburbs of London and throughout Great Britain.
About Professor Taylor, I have to defend the absent. I think Professor Taylor's idea, coming from an economist, is surprising because he gave a macroeconomic argument in favor of stability of rules, which is one of the bases of the rule of law in any version that we could imagine. And it is so easy in many countries that suffer the instability of law. I come from one, which is not the worst, by the way. There are even worse, even in the region. One of the arguments for the instability of law are crises. And then there is this thing that Schmidt said, and many, even a Supreme Court in one term says, we cannot define crisis. Crisis is by itself without definition. It's something that happens, and the main result for that crisis is that we forget the rules of law and something else has to become, and basically is in civilized nations discretion. That means allow political powers to think some solution, and in other countries is generally dictatorships, more or less. So that's why I felt this idea of Professor Taylor.
I think it's a wonderful idea,
No,
but I question how realistic it is for reasons that are rather important.
Yes, and that I agree, but it doesn't give at least the argument for let's say, abandoning rules. That was, we've had another, apart from the legal arguments, a more important macroeconomic one. But anyway, yes, I agree.
I'd like to make a 1-minute comment. I've done some statistical studies of let's say for short, economic culture as an influence on the level of employment and unemployment across countries. And it was, in other words, do differences in the various components of economic culture, to the extent that the availability of data allow us to capture them, do inter-country differences in those components help to understand inter-country differences in unemployment rates? And to the best of my recollection, the economic culture components that I've been championing of late, like vitalism or vitalism-pragmatism, and even material drives to accumulate wealth, those are good for employment and reduce unemployment in terms of these inter-country differences. So it's not as if if we were to wake up next morning with a new devotion to economic change, to innovation, to creativity, that we would have to brace ourselves for a wave of unemployment. It would, if anything, it would help to reduce unemployment, according to my results. Those could be right I could be wrong, but I think they're more likely to be right, because there's some reasons to think that a climate of creativity, experiment, exploration, ending hopefully in innovation, buoys up business investment demand, and that's terrific for employment.